Valve is one of the most important video game companies in the world. Heck, it's one of the most important companies in general. Not only because it created Steam, a digital distribution platform that is responsible for the flourishing and absolute domination of PC games in the market, but it also helped shape the way that some games are made, especially first-person shooters, for better or for worse. But there may be some things you did not know about this company. And because you specifically asked for this, this is the top 7 things you didn't know about Valve. Little tidbits that you may have not been aware of or have missed altogether, or maybe you actually knew because you are actually Gabe Newell. In which case, hi, big fan, where's Left 4 Dead 3? That being said, let's get it started with number 7. HalfLife was a Stephen King inspired game. You may not actually realize this from the way that the game looks now, but HalfLife is absolutely inspired by a Stephen King novel called The Mist, which you may know as that book that inspired that movie that was also called The Mist, and you may not actually see any sort of resemblance between the movie and Half-Life because the game would take place in the military base from which all those things escaped. A military base where they were conducting experiments to see if they could breach the divide between dimensions, which actually is what happens in Half-Life. The barriers between worlds shatter and things come through. The game was initially called Quiver, and the idea was to make a game that wasn't cliché, a first-person shooter that wasn't just like every other one. So you had a more focused design in terms of actually getting the player to follow a certain story, though not having too much of that story front-loaded to the player, not having it be constantly spouted at you. It was a more show, don't tell approach to storytelling, and it worked. It worked fantastically. And it made for some very interesting follow-ups, whereas every game started adopting the same kind of structure of a more linear approach to the level design and scripting, and we got the follow the waypoint marker simulator, which is Call of Duty because of Half-Life. Yeah, you can blame Half-Life for this one. It's your fault, Valve. You did it. You did it. Number 6. Prospero. Half-Life was not the only game that Valve wanted to make when the company started in 1996. There was also a really ambitious title called Prospero, which was a sort of an MMO based around the idea of exploration. You would play as a character named Aleph, who would have psionic powers and would explore a library, a nexus of worlds. The basic gameplay was more akin to what you would actually see in the Xen level of Half-Life 1, where you spontaneously started playing a platformer game and not a first-person shooter. But apart from that, the game would let you explore worlds that weren't just made by Valve, but worlds made by other players. It was a game designed to encourage modders to create their own worlds and add them to the game, and everybody could share their worlds and explore and play together. Again, it was sort of an MMO in the broader sense. It probably wouldn't get to the number of players an MMO has to have to be considered an MMO, but still, it was very, very ambitious, and it was cancelled so that Valve could focus more on Half-Life, though bits of it did show up in other games. For example, the music turned up in Half-Life, and the basic idea of there being a central pillar from which you would go to explore other levels, other worlds, some made by players. That's Portal 2's multiplayer. Number 5. They were working on a fairy RPG, a game where you would play as fairies, and a sort of action-style fantasy RPG game based a lot on movement, on flight, and on mouse gestures, and it was horrible, which is why it was cancelled, and then they started working on Left 4 Dead. But it was a very important lesson, this game, because it taught them how not to make games. They took what they learned from how to make not games and used that information to make actual games, which were better than the fairy RPG, though they are still working on an RPG. At least there's bits of RPG in Source 2, certain files indicating that they didn't give up on the idea of making one, or at least elements of one being in a future certain game. Number 4. Stars of Blood. Speaking of Valve RPGs, they were actually making at one point a space pirate RPG. It's a game with ships in space that you could fight with and blow stuff up and steal stuff, and well, space pirate RPG, what more can be said? There's even, well, not screenshots, there's artwork of the game, what it would have looked like, and it honestly looked kind of intriguing. It's the kind of thing that you would say, you know what? Probably Valve could make a really good game out of something like this if they really put their backs into it, which at one point they did, but they never actually released it, and it's probably cancelled, most likely. Valve does that a lot. Speaking of which, number 3, ... Number 2, Valve exists because of Microsoft. Now, you may not like Microsoft, and at some points we'll get admitted, Valve doesn't really like Microsoft either. I mean, they made their own operating system just because Windows 8 was looking like it was going to make its own store that would sort of forbid the existence of other stores, which, you know, Microsoft didn't with Windows 8, so Valve backed off on pushing SteamOS, but then Microsoft pushed back with Windows 10 and their store and UWP, and you kind of think that Valve should really start pushing SteamOS again hard, maybe by launching a certain game exclusively for it. But it owes its existence to Microsoft because Gabe Newell and Mike Harrington, the founders of the company, they worked for Microsoft. Gabe, right out of college, went to work for Microsoft. He dropped out of Harvard, and according to what he said, he learned more in 3 months at Microsoft than in years spent at university. And he spent a lot of time there, years, working on Windows, on various versions of it. And that job was very profitable. He was a millionaire by the time he left Microsoft. So that's why he could fund the creation of Valve as a company, and also when the publishing of Half-Life took a bit of a downturn because they decided to push the game back a year because they had just realized, you know what, we can make this a better game than it is now, than you're seeing in the background. Sierra wasn't gonna pay for that, so he paid for that out of his own pocket for a year. And the game was released and it was amazing, and Gabe is now worth billions of dollars, which he earned rightfully. Gabe Newell 2020, just saying. But yeah, Microsoft does have a big part to play in the existence of Valve. And the number one thing you didn't know about Valve is they are not Volvo. Now, regardless of what the internet may say, Valve does not actually make cars. Valve is not Volvo. So it doesn't matter how much you ask Volvo to give you diaritide, Volvo can't do it because Volvo is not Valve and Valve is not Volvo. And you may be saying to yourself, wait a minute, isn't this joke kind of 3-4 years out of date? Why are you telling this to us now? It's not funny anymore. We wanted to learn stuff that we actually didn't know about Valve. Well, here's the thing. Valve is such a well-covered company in the media that everything that Valve wants you to know, and in certain cases doesn't want you to know about it, you know about it. The things they really don't want you to know about it, you're not gonna learn, because it's a private company and Gabe can do anything he wants with it, which includes never releasing Gunman Chronicles on Steam. Well, that would be it for the top 7 things you didn't know about Valve. Come back next time when I'm gonna try and take more of your suggestions and turn them into a show, like this time, and not make something original like you usually see. It's gonna be fun. Goodbye.